Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our class tonight. Thanks for jumping in early. I'm being told that instruction starts tomorrow, but I guess I'm jumping ahead, but we're getting this recorded so that way you guys have this and get started in the class. There's no need to turn your camera on. It's not going to matter at this point. I'm just going to show you a couple of things. We'll go through the class and we'll go through our lecture for tonight, and then we'll kind of figure out where we're going from here. Make sure you guys know what's happening with the class, and then we can go from there. So I'm going to share this first, and you should be seeing my screen now. Okay. All right. So welcome to class. This is ERE 288 if you're in the wrong class. And nonetheless, I guess you figured that one out. This is a measurement class. We do educational measurement and program evaluation. So we'll spend the first half of this class doing specifically work around measurement, testing, measurement, things along those lines. And the second half of the class will be around program evaluation specifically. It is an opportunity for you to dig in around the idea of measurement and really think about how we do this, what does that construct look like, and how we actually put together these things in a way that's going to be meaningful and useful for you in your professions and in a variety of ways. I find it interesting. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. I'm not really sure, but we'll see how we go from there. So my name is Dr. Corey Greenlaw. I've been with Fresno State now. I'm in my 21st year of teaching for them. I teach typically ERE220, which is a research class. I teach this class, and then I teach statistics, all classes everybody just loves to take. Super excited, I'm sure, for most of you. And then and then the rest, and then I work full time as well for Fresno County Superintendent of Schools, and so I'm an assistant superintendent there. I came out of Central Unified years ago, and as I have a master's in counseling psychology, and so I was actually a therapist and a counselor, and then I've been an administrator for more years than you want to think about, doing it for a long time. So that's my experience. I've done a lot of program evaluation. I've done a lot of measurement. I've worked for the state of California in some of their technical design groups for the assessment system for the state of California for the CASP test. I actually sat on a board for that for many years. I now sit on as the chair for it's called the CPAG, California Practitioners Advisory Group, and I advise the California State Board of Education on accountability stuff. It's an official group. If you're really bored one day, you can watch videos of it, of our meeting. We sit in the boardroom. It's not very exciting, but I'm the chair for that. So I do a bit with measurement. I do a bit with that type of work, specifically in education. And so I do have some street cred along those lines as well. And then I've been a trainer for anybody who has done this in the past, the assessment systems for California as well. Specifically, I've trained around the CASP. I remember when it first came in, and I've been doing that for a bit. So that's my background. That's kind of what I'm doing. That's kind of how we do this. I will try to keep most of this stuff relevant. And then we'll just talk about what this class entails, what the syllabus is as well. If we go actually in here to the syllabus, we'll download it and see, and then we'll talk from there. Okay, so this is an asynchronous class. And so that means that you don't have to, we're not going to make this required to be online. So tonight is really going to be the only time that it's not a requirement at all, but that I'll actually sit and do a lecture with you in a kind of class setting. I have recordings of lectures, so you can watch those at will. And then I'm going to set up times to be able to actually connect with you if you have questions as we go along. So I'll post some times. It'll be a variety of times. It's not going to be the same time. It's kind of like a an office hour, but I don't do the same time for office hours because I find that people want to meet at different times. So I'll show you what that looks like, and I'll advertise those, and then just open up a Zoom and you can connect. That being said, I do actually put this as a phone number to my office. You're welcome to reach out to me there if you want to. Here is my the actual my email. I know I should have a Fresno State one. Either one doesn't matter which one you use. You can email me. I am available. If you have a question, please don't suffer in silence. We'll connect. I can talk to you on the phone. We can talk via Zoom. You're welcome to come downtown, which nobody ever wants to do, but you can come and meet with me in my office and we can chat about your any questions that you have around this. So I try to be very accessible, but because this is an asynchronous class, I'm not going to hold something where I force you guys to come every night. It just doesn't work very well. So this is the Zoom link. Just make sure you use that one. It's the same one we have for here. Anytime that if I were to do something live, I would record it and post it so that way you actually have, just so you're kind of aware for that. Um, this is the text. I try to get one. I tried to get one that's a pretty inexpensive way to do that, to be able to put it in. This one here is like 30 bucks. You can get it used somewhere else for even cheaper if you want to. It's been around forever, but it is a very good measurement text. This dude here, Thorndike, his grandfather was one of the founding people for this whole work around measurement. And so he knows what he's talking about. It's really, I mean, you can see the hardcover, you can get it for 8 bucks. So this is an old book, but measurement doesn't change all that much, so it doesn't really matter. We will hit some of the other stuff, but this is a good book. Eighth edition is totally fine. Yes, it's thick. Yes, it's dense. Yes, there's some of the things in it that you're like, oh my gosh, this seems like it's kind of over your head, but it's a really good text for you to be able to use in this class. So we'll do that. I will put some articles and things in Canvas as well that you'll be able to use. You probably will want the text. You don't have to get it if you don't want to. That's your choice, but I encourage you to do that. So I do say that it's required and whatever, but I would get it from there because it's cheaper. So here's some of the assignments. We'll talk about that. We do have discussion posts that you're going to have to do in here and you're going to reply to. We're going to do something called a program identification, which I will describe to you in a little bit. You're going to do an assessment instrument evaluation. You're going to do some article reviews. You're going to create an actual assessment. You're going to do this is an instrument evaluation. This is the assessment creation. You're going to have a final project. You're going to do a final project presentation, and you're going to do a midterm and a potential final. So that's pretty much all the assignments in this class. You're going to find that most of the assignments happen towards this latter half of the class because I want you to get started on the final project, which I'll give you some resources for that. We'll talk about it as we go along. But that's really, I try to scaffold this in a way that's going to allow you to work towards that end product as opposed to just doing busy work as we go along. Here's kind of where we go. These are the assignments. You can see this first part here, weeks 1 through 7 lead up to the midterm. All the content that we cover in here will be covered on the midterm. This is all measurement stuff. From 9 to 15 is more program evaluation. And this is where your project actually, so you'll see that the actual assignments start being due after the midterm. So you're going to focus in on learning some of the stuff here, and then you start doing some of these pieces, but we'll talk about them. You'll hear them in the lectures because we cover them. It was something from last semester, and then I can answer any questions about them as we go along. All right. And then you see the rest of that is in there. So that's kind of the syllabus for a second. Are there any questions that you guys may have right now? Anything that's coming up? Anything that you want to, I don't know, ask questions about? You're welcome to unmute if you want to. All right, you're a quiet group. No questions. Thank you. And where are you guys? If I may ask, I wish I was in live. I wish I was live. There's 38 of you in this class, so that makes it a little bit hard. 30, 37, something like that. I prefer a live format, but time prohibits me from doing kind of a live on-ground class anymore. But I'm wondering, where are you guys all coming from? If you want to throw it in the chat, or what's your background? Are you teachers? Are you counselors? Are you doing that? And are you here in Fresno, or are you guys somewhere else? Where are you guys all coming from? Put it in the chat for me if you would. Teachers, counselors, or you can unmute and tell me who you are. Colinga, kindergarten teacher, love it. School counseling, Fresno, way to go. Fourth grade teacher, teaching in Carruthers, love it. Teachers, Fresno school counseling, awesome. I was a school counselor for a while and taught in school counseling programs for years. Third grade teacher in Sanger, I love it. Where else? Anybody else? Where are you coming from? Second grade teacher, Reedley, awesome. So I'll bet you're excited, my kindergarten, second grade, third grade teachers. I bet you're excited that we're not doing a lot of statistics yet, right? And that's usually I get a lot of sweat from my kindergarten teachers who say, "Oh goodness, no statistics." It's actually fun. Higher ed disability counselor, awesome. So where do you work? Do you work for State Center? Do you work for Fresno State? Where do you work? School counseling, Kermit Carruthers, in the general and experimental master's program and TA for a statistics lab here. Okay, right on. So Trinity is going to be your connection if you have any statistics questions, because she's got it going on. I love it. Way to go. Fresno State, Amanda, that's awesome. Fantastic. Experimental master's program is going to be right up your alley. We're going to talk a little bit about assessment and measurement and all that. I love it. Final semester in the SAC at academic counselor, Fresno State. Way to go. Way to go. Fresno State Student Affairs College Counseling. Awesome. Awesome. All great programs. So this should be stuff. And the reason I ask some of these things is that a lot of this stuff is going to be relevant to what you're doing. A disability counselor may be using test results to be able to identify what's going to be best for their clients or the people they're working with. Well, how do you interpret those test results if you don't know anything about the assessments? If you can't look at an assessment and say, this is good quality, this is bad quality, then you're a sucker. Then you are a pawn to whatever testing program actually sends you what you're going to do. If you can't have a knowledgeable conversation or understanding about what you're reading and how you're evaluating it, you're missing the piece of it. If you're looking at it as a second grade teacher and I'm trying to teach reading to my second grade students and some are lagging, some are going ahead, which is the test that's going to be better for us to be able to use? What is the program first, and what program is going to be using a specific assessment result that's going to help me make a decision about where I move that student? If I don't understand about what that assessment result is telling me, if I don't understand the quality of that assessment, if I don't understand the validity of the actual terms that I'm using in there, and whether or not this really does measure what I want it to measure, then again, I'm a sucker. I'm a pawn to the educational testing company that sold me this test. You believed the brochure. Now, it might be true, but it might not be. If they haven't given it to the right students and it's not matched to what your students are, do you guys realize, and you'll probably hear this in one of the other lectures, maybe even tonight, do you realize that in California years and years ago, we used to give a state level test that was given for years. And that test was a norm reference test. And that norm group, and we'll talk about this later, the norm group was students in Michigan. What a norm reference test means is that I compare your results to the normative group. That normative group was students in Michigan. Well, do you think students in Raisin City or Carruthers are like the students in Michigan? No. So yet I'm making a judgment about whether my kids know and understand a concept based upon what kids in Michigan know. That's bad. That's bad measurement. That's bad decision making. That's not valid. That's what we're in this class about. I want you to be able to be an informed consumer in what you're using. My school counseling friends may be actually doing some work with kids around thinking about you may be doing the Holland's types of tests to be able to see what their career stuff is. Rather than simply giving the test, we want you to be able to have a better understanding about what that background is. What does it mean and why would I be doing it? How does it help? Is it predictive or is it not predictive? And what does that mean? If I tell a student, if my son, I love this, one of my favorite stories. I'm a story guy, but I have a son right now. He's 25 years old. Back when he was in high school, I think he was in 10th grade, maybe ninth grade, I can't remember. He took one of those career inventories, which many of my school counseling friends who are on this right now will be giving. They'll be actually giving those tests to these kids, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a great discovery tool. There's a lot of really fun things you can do with it. Super interesting way to think about stuff. But he took the test, and you know what his result was? The test, number one thing that they told my son to be was a magician. No joke, a magician. That's what they told him. And my son right now is in dental school in San Francisco in his second year. He's probably one of the smartest kids I've met. Super smart kid, just kills it with that kind of stuff. Not that a magician's bad, and I'm imagining that you got to be really smart to be a magician as well. But what I'm saying to you is that sometimes I look at these, I have to understand what they're telling me and how those things are linked to the construct of what they're actually looking to measure. That's what this class is about. The other thing that you'll do is with program evaluation. Program evaluation really is the idea of looking at what you're doing and is it making the impact you expect it to make? Is it actually worth the time and money, effort, all the rest that you're going to do? If I look at it and say, I want to be able to do, let's say right here that we're going to be looking at kind of student affairs. And with student affairs, we're going to be going out and connecting some of my first year students with teachers before they actually come to school, so that before they come to college, so that way they feel more comfortable. So maybe I'm going to do a program that's going to say, all right, anybody that's a non-traditional coming back to school type of thing, they're older and maybe they need to have a nice meet and greet and have burritos, breakfast burritos with some of the faculty so they'll feel more comfortable. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. Okay. So that's great. That costs money, costs time, does all this stuff. Does it work? That's program evaluation. We're going to look at it. What are my intended outcomes? What I expect to be able to find? What is the cost for something like that? Does it work? It could be just as basic as counseling services to students actually in the student affairs programs. If I'm actually providing these services, what is it worth it? Do kids make better decisions about their education? Do they stay in college longer, go more often, get better grades, have a clearer picture of where they want to go next, feel more connected to the university because they're accessing and using those services? Program evaluation techniques will help you do that. That's what we're doing with this class. Yes, it is a checkbox that you need to be able to do to get your master's degree. True, or bachelor's. I think most of you guys are in your master's programs. Yes, it is. But it doesn't have to only be that. What I want to encourage you to do is listen in this class, take the content that you get out of this and say, how can I apply this into the work that I'm actually doing? Because this work, the stuff we're going to talk about, is in all of your work. And it's foundational. You guys get it, right? You took statistics because it's the language we use to be able to justify what we're doing. You had to understand that language. If you can't speak the language, you just can't participate in the conversation. You may have taken research methods, and some of my friends here on this class have, some of you haven't. I learned that as I've taught this class just recently. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Those who have, now you understand some of those concepts of research to be able to really interpret the data that you're looking at when you read those studies and the rest. This class is the next step to be able to say, if I'm looking at results from an assessment, is it good or bad? Is it worth it? And how can I use those results in a program to really determine effectiveness? That's what we're doing here. So all of the pieces that you have, each one of these modules, and you'll see as you go into here, each one of these modules that you're going through take you through some of that. We do our introduction tonight. I'll take you through a little bit of a lecture. We're going to look at measurement and numbers, just kind of a basic background stuff. Giving meaning to scores, there's going to be a recording in there. Evaluating test scores and reliability and validity. Reliability and validity is the most boring thing on the face of the planet, but it truly is one of the most important things. Think about it this way. I'll bet you know somebody who's taken the drug, the Ozempic stuff right now, right? If they were to take this drug and say, I spent this money on it and I want to see if I'm losing weight, and I got on a scale and that scale told me I weighed a certain amount, and then I got off that scale and got right back on it and told me I weighed a different amount, I wouldn't know if this drug's working. I might be able to look at it and judge myself, but I don't know if it's working. That's reliability and validity. It's to know whether or not what is actually happening is meaningful and is aligned to what you actually are doing. Is it reliable, consistent? Is it valid? Meaning, can I draw conclusions, make interpretations, and do something based with the data that's factual and correct? If I can say, yes, this drug is working, then my weight is going down. But if that scale is inaccurate and I don't know if it's right or going up or down or whatever, I can't draw those conclusions. That is what reliability and validity is. It's super boring. Let me tell you, if you want to go to sleep, read something from Samuel Messick from the 80s. He was the most revolutionary, recent person who talks a little bit about reliability and validity. Man's it boring, but it is really important, because if you don't have a test that has reliability, established reliability, doesn't have validity, what are you using it for? Anyway, talk about scales in that kind of this idea. What does scaling look like when you use these? Testing issues, we're going to talk a little bit. I think they talk about AI in here as well. And then we talk about interest and personality. Take that, and then we go into the actual program evaluation, where you're going to look at some of the outcomes that you're going to look at. We'll talk about needs assessment, super important, very interesting, very, very useful tool that we can use in schools and in education and in counseling as well. We'll talk about questions. We'll talk logic models, which is a really interesting tool for us to be able to build pieces together. You'll be able to read there. Cost analysis. Again, it's just looking to be able to say what is the cost. And remember, cost is not just money. Your time is money as well. So any of those things that's pieced in there as well. Then we'll talk about some of the designs and then we'll get into qualitative. So each one of these elements, if you go into it for each one of the nights, so let's take a look earlier on here. Let's take a look at giving meaning to scores. You'll see that I've got the PowerPoint and then I have a recording of the lecture. So I'm not going to hold you to coming to a night to be able to do a lecture, which I used to do in the past and people didn't like that. So I put the recording in there. It is of this content. It is not of you asking questions, it's of others asking questions. It doesn't really matter. It's still the content. It's worth it, but it also has the PowerPoint, and then I will answer questions you have it. This will allow you the time to be able to do whatever. So there should be a recording for each one of the weeks, for each one of the lectures that you can watch as you go along. And in each one of those lectures that we also talk about the assignments. But if you have more questions, we can do it. Okie dokie. So that is where we are tonight. I want to give you a little bit of a lecture tonight and talk a little bit about some of the background and measurement and then answer any questions. I'm recording this. I will post this in the announcements. I tend to communicate most through announcements, as you can see here. And then when I post the announcement, it actually publishes it, so it sends it out to you. So just be expecting that. Okay, I've gone through a lot. Any questions so far? You don't have to have any, but if you do, I'm happy to answer them. Okay. I'm going to go find this and bring it over really fast. I got two screens, but I get lost. All right, let's talk for just a minute about a couple of things here and do a standard, again, lecture per se. I don't like that term, but it is what it is. I'm happy to answer questions as you're going along. I do have in front of me here the chat up as well, so I can kind of see if you have questions, you want to put something in the chat, I'll monitor that as well. But if you have a question that you want to shout out, please feel free to just unmute and talk because this really is something that I want from you. Okay, so let's talk for a couple of minutes. So let's just get this idea of assessment really fast. We're going to talk for the first couple of weeks about this idea of assessment. So it really is, we don't have to go too far along this line, but when you look at it, assessment really looks at this idea of what are you doing? We're going to sit, the Greek word, as they say here, it's really the Latin verb, sorry, is to sit with. You really are looking at a student-centered process of gathering information about what they know and understand about a concept. Okay. A classic educational example, third grade math teachers use student math journals to sit with learners, reviewing their thinking process, providing comments and guiding questions rather than only scoring right or wrong answers. We will talk about measurement in terms of assessment results and tests by and large, because that's where we start. But that's not that's not the only way we assess. There's so much more to this. Some of the best things we'll talk about later. These are days around focus groups. I literally just left. I have two of my friends who are in their doctoral programs and they're struggling getting their dissertations done. So we met for an hour, kind of helping them, prodding them along to get this done. And in the process, we talked about some of those tools. And one of the tools they're going to use is going through and actually doing focus groups, which is a great tool that you can use to be able to put that all together. So very helpful. It's a tool that you'll use. So the reason that we do some of this kind of stuff is really for us to better reach a conclusion that allows us for it to be based on data. Now, you probably have heard of this before, this McNamara fallacy. Now, McNamara this is the dude on the side there with that real sharp haircut that he had. He was he was a gentleman who was responsible for a lot of work in Vietnam. Okay, and so he ended up what he really did is he kind of relied upon kind of different counts and other things to measure the success in Vietnam, but he was not really looking at what was going on. And because of that, we had some problems. So you can see this. My gosh, why do I have it spin? Is to measure whether you can. So the first thing that he did is he measured those things that were the most things that were easily measured. Is it okay as that's it's okay for you to be able to do that, but they looked at the things that were truly easy to measure, the things that you could observe very quickly and easily. And with that, you actually come. I can't stand that thing. It's making me crazy. The second step really is to disregard anything that is not easily measurable. Okay, so he was looking at counts, he was looking at numbers of raids, he was looking at other things that were just easily observable, and then making decisions about whether we should continue with the war in Vietnam. And because of that, they were led incorrectly. The Vietnamese people in Vietnam, they would hide some of their dead bodies to falsify the numbers of dead, of what they were doing, what we were winning with. It was just crazy. And then because you can't measure it, you can say, oh, well, because I can't measure it, then it must not be important. Because it's not important, we don't need to, because I can't measure it, it's just, we're just going to disregard it. And then say, if you can't easily measure it, it doesn't even exist. And so because of that, we move on. And what does not get counted does not count. And that's wrong. So when we're looking at measurement in this terms, we have to say just because it's not easily measured does not necessarily mean that that's a good thing. So we can look at our authors. This is our author's grandpa, great grandpa. I think it was his grandpa, Edward Thorndike, and he was one of the ones that actually pioneered this idea of measurement. Whatever exists in some quantity. If it exists in the quantity, it can be measured. So we're looking to be able to identify how do we measure something. Just because it's difficult to measure doesn't mean that it shouldn't be measured. So we're going to be looking at some of those. Now remember, measurement and assessment, it's not just test scores. It's there, but it's not just test scores. Okay. So there's a couple of purposes that we get into for assessment. There's a couple of reasons why we might assess things. Certifying student learning is an example. Grades, graduation requirements, those are check boxes. Motivate it. Sometimes we do things like low stakes quizzes in a classroom that make formative assessments that motivate kids to actually participate because people in general tend to be motivated based upon how they see their performance, and that works. Sometimes we may be using it for some of our instructional planning or diagnosis. So I might actually give assessments to not only be able to give feedback to a student to say, hey, you can move here, do this, make a change here, but it may also be helpful for me to be able to say, what do I need to reteach? What do I not need to teach because they've got it? So we can use that as a tool as an instructor, a teacher, an instructional planner to be able to really take that piece and make a decision about where we're going to go next. All of us know this, but it can be a really useful way to be able to do it. It can be feedback to stakeholders. And let me give you this. There's a couple of ways to do this. Parents, administrators, and community. An easy way to think about this is there are times early on in the 2000s when we used to give benchmark assessments, and those benchmark assessments were used to be able to feed right back up to the district office to say how we were doing. Yeah, okay, that can be useful, but maybe what it's more useful for is for the student in the classroom to help them to make some decisions. You'll see my bias on this as we go through. I have a strong bias to think that assessment should be used to motivate, drive, help, engage students in a classroom setting. That's the most effective use of assessment results, most important use of it. Tend to use a lot of it for some of the other stakeholders, administrators being maybe at a district, but even at the state level. Parents, it's one of the things we use our CASP assessment results to be able to put into show how we're doing as a school district as well. And sometimes we actually may use some of our assessment for research. So we're going to be able to say, if you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of a new reading program, I want to spend all this money. I'm going to take the money that the state is going to give us, and we're going to say, does this actually work? So I'm going to collect some data. I'll assess in a variety of ways to really make a decision about whether this is actually working the way we'd expect it to work. Is this worth the money? Is it worth the time? Should I use this one or this one? Things along those lines. So assessment results can be used in a variety of ways as well. So uh, I'm not gonna, we can spend a lot of time on these and I don't want to do that. I just want to give you a basic understanding. If you're reading the text and looking at this, you'll see that some of this will be kind of drawn out. But our classical test theory, which we'll talk about later when we're talking about numbers, really really when we look at this classical test theory, there's a true score, there's an observed score, and then there's error. And what that simply means is that we believe that we give you an assessment, and here's your assessment items. I have 20 items. And how you respond on that item, some of it is due to what you really know and understand, some of it's what you don't know and understand, and some of it is just due to the fact that you made a mistake. You didn't read the question right. The question wasn't created correctly, something along those lines, and it's random. That's this kind of classical test theory. We'll talk about that later on. There's some of that that's definitely in there. We work very hard to reduce the randomness and the error that actually happens in there. We want to get it that as small as possible by writing good questions, giving good instructions, doing it in a standardized way. Standardization does not mean a negative thing. It just means it's done the same across. Standardized tests are things that people tend to get really upset about. Standardized tests are not a problem. High stakes tests used inappropriately are the things that are problems. So we'll keep that in mind. And then standards-based education, all of us are doing this right now. If you're in schools, actually, even in colleges, as you're taking these things, we actually base what we teach upon standards along those lines. It's more explicit in the school setting. You know that we have California content standards, and our assessments are built based upon those standards. There's an expectation that you will be able to demonstrate your knowledge of the standards that the state of California has identified as the most important things for a student at that grade level to know and demonstrate through this CASP assessment. It's 3 through 8 and 11, but nonetheless, that's what you're looking at. You create a standard based upon what experts say a third grader should be able to do in math at this point, and then we write items that measure whether they can or cannot do that, and we make a judgment about whether these standards are being taught and understood by their students. Now, there's a variety of things that go into that, right? I know many of you are going, well, wait a minute. I may set this standard and I may write a test question, but maybe my kid doesn't speak English. Maybe my student was not here all year. Maybe they've got things going on at home. Maybe they're homeless. Maybe they have food insecurity. Whatever it is. All those things may tie into whether or not they actually are able to answer some of those and demonstrate what they know and understand. Anyway, those are all important factors to be able to consider. There's this idea that everybody should be performing well, and we should be working at closing the achievement gap. What the achievement gap means is that we're all kind of, if I'm expected or predicted to perform here, but I perform here, I'm working very hard to get, I don't know if you can see my hands, but to close that gap, to bring everyone up as they're moving forward. There is an expectation that all students can learn. All students have an opportunity, regardless of their circumstance and regardless of where they are. That is a fundamental understanding in the United States. That's not a fundamental understanding in some other countries. But in the United States, we believe everyone should have access to education. Everyone should have access to rigorous, well-developed, high-quality instructional materials and content. Anyway, don't get me started on politics and all the rest. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to stay right where we are here and just keep it at that. We believe that. And with that, we believe that students can get better through better instruction, through better educational approaches, through innovative ways to be able to reach and engage students. And with that, we have high expectations. So we expect you to do better. There's always that expectation that if you're here today, I expect you to be higher tomorrow, better in measures of however we're measuring you. Okay, that is very, very, that's foundational to our education system. Now, that's not foundational to some people in the education system and some people in our governments and others, but that doesn't matter. The United States has had that kind of approach in certain ways. Again, like I said, we can go political and we can, but I'm not going to go there right now. But just keep that in mind. So that's when we look at this, we have the expectation of actually people will be growing. Here's a really good graphic. I love this to be able to see how things have changed over the course of the years. NCLB, many of you probably were in school when NCLB was happening, No Child Left Behind. And this was an approach that we looked at. It was very, very federal focused, and we shied away from that and changed to something that's ESSA right now, which is probably going to change in the next little bit because we have a current administration that has a very strong belief about certain things. We'll see what changes from that. They're pushing very hard to put things back at the state level, which neither here. It's in California. I don't think that's a terrible thing because I think California has some good good decisions about where they believe students should be going in certain ways. So I don't know that that's a terrible thing. But anyway, this is kind of some of the changing and some of the ways that we've looked at it. There's a little more flexibility with ESSA, which is the current way that the federal government has defined education. Whether that continues in the years to come, you'll be able to be witnesses to that. So you'll be able to hang on to see history being made in the United States. Another thing that we do use test scores for assessments is this idea of accountability. Accountability is a function of anything that has to do with political use of dollars and money. And it's accountability can have a bad rap, but there is some good to accountability. If I've given you something and I expect that you're going to do something with it, accountability means that you can demonstrate to me that you did what I said you were going to do, what you said you were going to do with it. And hopefully it had the impact you expected. So accountability is the way that we actually use this to say we're going to take these tax dollars and we're going to educate students on the standards that have been identified by the state we live in and ratified by the legislature and the others to say this is what they should be doing. And then I'm going to go teach and instruct and provide an instructional program with schools, extracurricular activities, tutoring, before or after school, whatever it may be, high quality instruction in a classroom. And therefore, students are going to access this content and they're going to get better as demonstrated by, in this case, standardized tests. So that's one way to do it, but that's not the only way. We can still show some accountability for ourselves or in our PLCs or in our school sites based upon little assessments that are closer to the actual student than these large scale assessments that become problematic. We'll talk about the differences on those as we go through as well. And sometimes we have some trends in education where we're doing some legal activism. I don't know if you guys have seen some of the court cases. There's many more that have come. The one that I can't remember the name right off the top of my head that came out of the COVID era where they were saying they didn't have access to content and it's causing problems as we go in as well. But Williams was one that was done. They want to make sure they had equitable access. This happened back in the 90s. And textbooks were a big issue because many students didn't have actual textbooks to take home. So class action lawsuit against California. California now has a Williams where we go in and count textbooks. And we do that every single year in many schools to make sure that the students have what they're supposed to have. Some of these things we do authentic assessment. Right now, we're getting more and more into this idea that assessment should really mimic what we expect a child to be actually doing or a student to be doing. We may do this more in a college setting. You may do scenario-based. A classic example of authentic assessment. Maybe this is one, writing a persuasive letter to an editor because you may do that. But another classic way to do kind of this authentic assessment is I may teach you an outdoor program on how to rappel. And the way that I see whether or not you know how to rappel is you get up on a rope and you rappel. That's authentic assessment. And another authentic assessment is I may actually do some of this project-based stuff where I'm going to go in and do different pieces where I may apply different types of work to what I'm doing let's say I'm going to be teaching kids how to actually do geometry. And so with that, I'm going to actually put together some measure of geometry to apply to how big a letter you're going to do, resize, rescale, and build all those things together. I've seen some of those. Those are authentic assessments. Okay. Portfolios are another way that we can do that. You've probably seen some of these digital writing portfolios and the rest. We have state level, we have national, and we may have international assessments that they use across. State level is CASP. The national assessment was NAEP. Whether or not we actually use NAEP in the future, we'll see. Right now, there's not a desire to change that. And then an international one is PISA. So let me give you just a really quick rundown of how some of these things look a little different. California's CASP assessment, we give it to all students. That's what they put penalties on school districts if you're under testing some grades. So they're looking to test all students. NAEP it's done in certain group. If you're going to say you're going to do fourth, you do fourth, seventh, and I think it's 11th grade or 10th grade. And so if you're going to do fourth grade, you're not doing every fourth grader in the United States. You do some matrix sampling. So you may take some people from this state, some people from that state, and you just take pieces of those and you get a large enough sample to represent what fourth graders in the United States or California are doing. So you're not doing everybody, you're just doing a portion of them to get a sample. International takes a smaller sample, but of countries. And so they may actually say a certain number of students from the United States, a certain number of students from Singapore, and you go and you're going to pull and pool all those data together to be able to see how they can compare across countries. So these are all different types of testing that actually may happen. Okay, so just be aware of that. PISA still is happening. That's the science test that they use. There's another one they use for math as well. I'm going fast. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. I'm going to give us background on some of this stuff. Okay, here's terms. You can read them, but we tend to use these interchangeably. They're not truly interchangeable. Measurement, assigning these numeric values. Testing is the administering a test under standardized conditions. Some of the tests that you may know as the SAT, the ACT, if you did the MCAT, if you're going to go to medical school. Assessment is the overall process that we actually use in collecting and interpreting. So remember, assessment is not simply going out and giving a test, it's interpreting those in a certain way. Okay? So those are a couple of terms that you can use. Standardized testing is a process by which we standardize the administration of a test. It's very important. And the reason it's important is that if I want to give a test and say, do our fourth graders doing well in math? If I give a test, and let's pretend that I give it to some students early in the morning, and then I give it to some students late in the day at 5 o'clock, or I give them a test that has some of the students get the introduction and the information and instructions, some of them don't, or I give some students a test that have 25 questions and some students get a test with 13 questions. I can't use all those comparably. I can't put them all together because they're different. A standardized test gives a uniform, clearly specified methodology for the administration of that test, for the procedures of how you're actually going to give the test. That allows them all to be lumped together to make a clear picture about what it is. Now, it could be a bad test, but everybody's taking the same bad test. Okay, that's standardization, is making sure that I've done it in the same way. Okay, so all this standardization is not a bad thing because standardization is simply the process under which I administer the assessment. Okay. There's always, I love this. I don't do well on standardized tests. What does that mean? You don't do well on time-based, on tests that are high stakes, things on those. Standardization is the process of administering the test. It's not a test. Just be aware of that. Okay. Okay, so here's some terms that you guys can actually look at along the lines of this assessment work and testing that we're looking at. Group and individual, you can give one or many. The CASP is given as a group because people all do it together. A Woodcock-Johnson is a intelligence test that they actually give that is actually given individually, one-on-one. Sometimes we're looking at how quickly you do things, it's processing speed. Sometimes it's if you can get through everything. Okay, the AP English essay is a power test. I want to get all the way to the end. I'm going to do the whole thing. If you remember back in elementary school, you did those multiplication ones that you had a whole page that you had to be able to do. That's a speed test. If I can get through, they're measuring different things. Remember, they're measuring different things. And you're looking at those speed multiplication tests, that's automaticity. I want you to be able to quickly answer those. There are some there's some research that says automaticity in math and the speed that you actually do those can have a relationship later on when you're doing more complex calculations, but by and large, they don't tell us much. But we make our kids do them all the time. I bet you have kids or you remember doing them when you were in elementary school. My kids in school did these all the time. My son loved them. My youngest son loved doing those kinds of things. I don't know how much it helped him, nonetheless. Best effort versus normal behavior. So an IQ test, we're going to try to get to the highest score we get. A behavioral checklist, I'm trying to look at what you're typically doing. So I can see, is this a typical measure? We'll talk criterion and norm reference later on along those lines, but a criterion and norm reference test are a little bit different. I'm going to take you some of those in a minute and help you understand what some of those mean. But basically, a criterion reference test is you're measuring, taking your result and comparing it to a specific criterion, maybe a standard. A norm reference test, you're taking the results and referencing it against a norm group. The SAT is a norm referenced test. So a group of people took it. We compare your score to how they did. So if you got a whole bunch of smart people, you're going to be compared against that whole bunch of smart people. But if you got a bunch of dumb people that were in the norm group, you're the smartest of the dumb group. Just saying. But by and large, those large scale tests like that have a pretty good normative sample, but you can read in the actual administration manual, who is that norm group? Who are you being compared to? Is it relevant? Is it appropriate? Should I use it or should I not? Let me give you an example for just a second. An assessment that I'm using for reading is a fantastic assessment for reading for third and fourth grade students. But if I try to give it to ninth and 10th grade students, is it as appropriate? Well, if I look in the test to be able to see who is it developed for, who is it compared to, and who's the normative group, if all of my students that I'm creating these scores from are second, third, fourth, and fifth graders, I don't know that it's going to be very helpful to be able to tell me much about a 10th grader. And that's what you're looking for in this type of work. Okay, so is who you're looking at. And then the last one is the selected and constructed response, which you may have heard. We'll talk more about this in test creation later on. But really, selected response means that I can look to see, I see what all the answers are, and I just pick the right one. Constructed response means I have to create the actual response. I have to actually pull that out of my mind, my knowledge, my previous understanding. Okay, so multiple choice and essay, obviously. So these are some terms you're going to run into as we start to talk about this. High stakes testing is one of the areas that most of these things that people have problems with tests, they have these concerns. Basically, the outcome of the test may have a really big impact on what you're going to be doing. Okay. You may not go on to the next grade. You may not get into medical school. You may not get into the college of choice that you have, some along those lines. So failure on a high stakes test may have consequences in the long term. You may not be moved in a unit. You may not move over into an area that you want to do. With high stakes tests, you have people who have real test anxiety, and test anxiety is a real thing. It's not a made up condition. It really is something that people have. Some people are really good at taking tests. Some people are terrible because they get so stressed at the test. Those are factors that actually pull in. Remember, we talked about classical test theory. I'm going to take you back just a few slides. Classical test theory basically says it's the what your actual performance is plus error equals the observed performance. That error is made up somewhat of your test anxiety. If you have really high test anxiety where you blank, you forget things, you panic, you freak out, something along those lines, your observed score is going to be impacted. What you truly know is not really being measured because that test anxiety is masking some of that. That's classical test theory. And there's a lot of other things that can go into that error, but one of the major things in error is this test anxiety. If people have it, if they go in and freak out, and the higher stakes the test is, the more test anxiety people may have. There are some people who score extraordinarily well on tests. They do really well because they're comfortable, they don't get anxious, they have a good memory, yada 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 yada, whatever it may be, and that will not impact their overall scores as you're looking at that. So keep this in mind. It's a factor. Remember that a test score, this is something that you should stamp on your brain, especially all of my teachers, any counselors, anybody, an administrator who's going to be using this type of stuff. A test score is not just a measure of what a child knows and understands on the concept or construct that they're measuring. It is also a function of the context under which they were administered the test. It is a measure of the context under which they've been administered the test or the context under which they took the test. So the context may be high stakes, a lot of pressure, they folded. I didn't eat last night. I'm hungry. I'm thinking about food. I have a great story of a friend of mine. It's not great, it's a horrible story, but it's a good example. From down in San Diego, who was a principal, saw a kid that was struggling really bad on the test. They went and talked to the student after they took the test a couple days later, and they said what was going on. They said the night before they took this high stakes end of year test, their grandma, who they lived with and as their sole provider, died. But they were so worried about missing the test, they came in and took it anyway. How well do you think that student did on the test? Not well, because their test performance is a function of the context under which they were administered the test. That context was stress, sadness, terrible, whatever. You're not getting a true score. That's error. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's what we're looking for. We're looking to reduce that error as much as we can. You can't get rid of it altogether. There's some randomness to it, but keep that in mind. Okay, with assessment, there's a couple of assessment processes that we can talk about. One of them is formative assessment, and you may have heard this, specifically my teachers in the room. Super, super powerful tool, very, very useful. One of the key ways that we can see that have a great impact on student outcomes, this formative assessment process. It's truly an ongoing informal assessments. It's used during the instructional process to inform the instructional process, to inform the student about their progress and where I can go next. It is something that is involved in the process of teaching and learning because the student is going to be using these results as well. It is primarily used to help impact or improve the process in which we're actually teaching. And that's really where it came from. It was done years ago. It was coined by Michael Scriven back in the 60s. He did it with evaluation. We'll talk about him later on. He was looking at formative and summative evaluation. Summative was it was done, the whole car is done. What does it look like? Formative evaluation is I'm going to look at the line that is producing that car and the different pieces, what is working, what is not working. And he coined that term formative and summative. Bloom, if you guys remember, Bloom's taxonomy was the one who pulled it out of evaluation and put it in education in the 70s. And he talked about this idea of formative assessment. And he was the first one who did that. And it's grown from there. And we can talk about that later. Formative assessments, very, very powerful, very useful tool. There's lots of components to make it better, to make it a more useful tool in the educational environment, but it can be a really great way. And formative assessment is not just a test. It's all of the evidence we're collecting about what a child knows and understands and how we use it back in here. Here's a couple of things that you may have actually heard about this. Exit tickets, think pair shares, observation checklist. If all of these things are used to inform the instructional process, this can be formative and use and be really useful for a student to be able to move forward. Same thing in any type of work that you're using in collecting data. Summative assessment at the end, it's done, we've completed. Typically done at the end of a unit, end of a year, something along those lines. You're usually using it to evaluate kind of this achievement or their overall result per se. It's not a bad thing, it's not negative, it has its purpose, but it's not really being used to shape what's coming next. It can be used in a formative manner to shape planning for the next year, but as far as used by that student, it's usually too late because it's after the fact. Okay. Unit tests, final projects, benchmark exams, things along those lines. So all these are the types of assessment. These are the introduction to measurement, some of the terms, some of the work that you're going to do. We'll do more of this in different ways as we go through different pieces and dig in. It is just a way for us to begin to familiarize ourselves with measurement. If you get the text, you'll see some of these things we've talked about are covered in there. Gives you a good background to see where we're heading and where we're looking. We'll get deeper into each one of these concepts in each one of the weeks. I'm happy to answer questions for if you have them. This is all of the content I have for tonight, like new stuff. If you have questions, stick around. If you don't have any questions, we call it a night and we can kind of go from there. So I'm going to stop sharing now and come out. I'm here if you have questions. If not, you can call it a night, log out. Have a great night, and I'll send out when we'll open up some office hours in the coming weeks and connect and reach out if you have questions. So thanks a lot. Here if you have questions. Thank you and have a great night. Thank you. Have a great night. If you have a question, just unmute. You don't need to wait for me. If you have a question, just unmute. You go for it. Ask me if you have it.
Hello, can you hear me, Dr. Greenlaw?